I'm going to talk you through a Part C answer from the Christian Beliefs paper. This is from the creation section of Christian Beliefs, and the question is, explain the different ways that Christians would interpret the Genesis creation accounts. And as a Part C, it's worth 8 marks. Before I talk you through my answer, I'm just going to remind you of the structure that we suggest that you use during your exam, or ABCD structure. So this is the structure that all students have in their books, and we also tweet daily when we tweet exam questions, and we're interested in the Part C questions. And remember that ABCD stands for answer, back it up, challenge and decide. On a Part C question, you're just doing the answer and back it up. So never ever waste time giving your view in a Part C section, and don't waste time either explaining non-religious views in a Part C, because you won't get any credit for it. This is on the Christianity paper, and so obviously you don't need to give two views from different religions, but often it's useful to refer to different Christian denominations. And so you're going to have 2 paragraphs that start with an initial answer, so a response that's matched very closely to the question, and then you're going to back that up with 3 pieces of evidence, and then you're going to repeat that. In Part C's, Eduqas want to see sources of wisdom. Sources of wisdom can be religious texts, so obviously Bible passages on the Christianity paper, but equally it could be something from the Roman Catholic Catechism or something from the Nicene Creed. Your conscience can be a source of wisdom, because if you think your conscience is inspired by God, which many Christians do, that is a source of wisdom. But also people can count as a source of wisdom if those people are speaking from some source of authority. So my answer is going to refer to the Pope, for example, who would count as a source of wisdom. In addition, they like to see in a Part C that you're showcasing a depth of knowledge, and building your evidence is one way to do that, using linking terms. So things like in addition, moreover, furthermore, consequently, in contrast, however, in the same manner. Also showing that you're making a number of points, so things like, in addition to, finally, and so on. You're making very clear that you're building and giving a range of evidence, not just supporting your point with one piece of evidence. But now we'll return to my answer. So I have colour-coded my answer so that you can see where my initial answer is, and then my first back it up is in green, my second one is in blue, and my third one is in magenta. And you can see I've done the same thing for my second paragraph. Also notice that when I give my initial answer, I echo the words that are in the question. Okay, and it might be useful for you when you read your question to box or underline or highlight the key words that you want to reflect in your answer. So here, interpret would be one, Genesis creation accounts as well, but also being mindful of the fact that it's asking for the different ways that Christians would interpret Genesis. And so for that reason, I've got 1 paragraph on literal reading, and then I say other Christians to make clear that I'm giving a different view, and I talk about a non-literal reading. So let's go to my first paragraph. And so I start by saying Christians who have a literal reading, literal is a key term on the specification, of the Bible would interpret the Genesis accounts. Look how my wording here matches the wording here, to be a factual account of the beginning of the world. So that's my answer, and now I'm going to unpack and give my evidence to support that answer. So my first bit of unpacking, if you like, or explaining and giving evidence, is that those with a literal reading of the Bible, such as creationists, so I'm being quite specific about who I'm talking about because I'm giving different responses and I'm using key terms, would state that where there are conflicts between scientific theories and what is presented to us in the Bible in Genesis, you would assume that the religious text is going to be correct because it has come from a God who is omniscient, and so it's going to be more accurate. So I'm explaining why they have that literal reading. Okay, because they would say, well, if it's a choice between believing an omniscient, omnipotent God and a human scientific theory, we're going to go with the former. Then I have got my second point. Again, those with a literal reading of the Bible, so a key term, would believe that the world was created in 6 days, followed by a day of rest. So I'm showing that I know Genesis 1 there, so I'm referring to a source of wisdom, but not doing it in quotes, not doing it word for word. You don't need to do that, even though this conflicts with scientific knowledge. So I'm kind of building on that first point there. Notice my second and third points are much shorter because I do only have about 4 minutes a paragraph. And then finally, to make sure that I've made clear that I've made 3 points, they would interpret the creation accounts. Again, I'm echoing this wording here in Genesis as stating that God created life as we see it now, rather than humans and animals evolving over time from simple organisms. So I have got 3 points that back up or explain a literal reading of the Bible, and in particular those Genesis creation accounts. So that's my first paragraph with my A, B, B, B. Then in my second paragraph, I want to give my different way that Christians can interpret Genesis. So other Christians, such as Roman Catholics, I'm identifying a denomination, I'm showing off my subject knowledge, might choose to interpret the creation stories, echoing the wording from here, in a non-literal way. Again, that's a key term from the specification. This can mean interpreting Genesis in a way that allows them to also accept scientific theories. So very different from this reading, which is rejecting scientific theories. So that's my answer. And now I'm going to unpack and add my evidence. And my first source of wisdom is Pope Francis, who was quoted quite recently actually as saying that God is not a magician and he hasn't just, wished the world into existence, and therefore we should accept Big Bang and evolution, and that doesn't undermine the idea that ultimately creation comes from God. So that is a non-literal reading of the Genesis creation accounts. It isn't just Roman Catholics that view the Bible in that way. Lots of Christians do, but I knew that I was going to use Pope Francis as my source of authority, and so it made sense to present a Roman Catholic view. Then my second point, again, I want to use some key terms. So I'm talking about atheological myths, and I'm going to say another way of interpreting Genesis or interpreting the Bible, so echoing the wording from here, is to say that Genesis isn't a factual account, but rather it's a myth written to explain why we should care for the world. And then I use the phrase finally, to show that I'm giving yet another view. Those with a non-literal reading of the Bible might want to interpret the creation stories to work with the theory of evolution. And so again, I'm kind of building on what I've said here. And so they might say that rather than God creating each species according to their kind, so I'm showing that I know the Genesis 1 creation account, that's a quote there, but instead in some way he set in motion the process of evolution, and we call that belief theistic evolution. And so again, I've got a good key term in there that not many candidates will use, so that will surprise the examiner and make it more likely that I'm going to be put into the top band. And so again, I've got my answer here in yellow. My other way of interpreting Genesis is a non-literal reading. I've got Pope Francis as my source of wisdom. I've spoken about atheological myths, and I've spoken about theistic evolution. And that's the pattern that we're advising you to use for your Part C answers. So an initial response that matches the question, and then back that up 3 times with sources of wisdom or teachings, and also make sure that you explain the point that your quote, your Bible passage is making. Don't just write a passage out and don't pause to explain it.